anybody asks.
We'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. Let's go ahead and introduce ourselves, and we'll start with our director over here and we'll work around.
Mark Fairchild, Executive Director of the Commission on Improving.
Representative Vanessa Summers, House District 99.
Dana Kenworthy, Court of Appeals.
Jennifer Dorfmeyer, Director, DCS.
Director.
Morning, Chris Naylor, Indiana Prosecuting Attorneys Council.
Morning, Eden Beasy from Department of Health, representing Dr. Weaver.
Bernice Corley, Executive Director of the Indiana Public Defender Council.
Terry Decker, Indiana Department of Correction.
Sarah Sailors, Division of Mental Health and Addiction.
Emma Blackwell, Youth Representative.
Dale Devon, District 5, State Representative, home of the Fighting Irish. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for everybody. We finally got a decent day and here we are inside, right? We just need to keep praying for those that are struggling with all the flooding and issues, and probably new homeless people now that never expected to be. When you think life is tough, you can always look for something a little tougher, right? So with that, we'll go ahead and if anybody had a chance to look at the minutes, if so, take a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
So with that, we'll move forward. Task force updates. And we have a presentation of Nancy Weaver. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you. Welcome. Thank you. I am Nancy Weaver, and I serve as the Director of Youth Justice Initiatives at the Indiana Office of Court Services. I'm here today as the co-chair of the Multi-System Youth Task Force, and I am not making this work very well. There it goes. Oops.
It's a left-handed clicker.
Oh, well, I should put it in my left hand then, shouldn't I? I co-chair the Multi-System Youth Task Force with Judge Harvey from Monroe Circuit Court. And today, we are really here, I'm here on behalf of subcommittee that is finishing up work from the previous strategic plan under the Children's Commission. We have a lot of folks on our task force who continue to work on things that even if we passed the deadline, they wanted to finish their work, and that subcommittee did a lot of work on objective number 2 under the previous. Still not working. I'm gonna try my left hand for a second and see if it works over there. Oh, I thought it was up there. No wonder. I'm very sorry. Okay, I'm just gonna. That would be great. Thank you. Thank you, Adriana. So under the previous task force, we were then called the Juvenile Justice and Cross-System Youth Task Force, and we had an objective that was to identify and encourage adoption of effective policies and practices that promote family engagement, healing, and growth in juvenile status offense cases. It was affectionately known as the Status Offense Subcommittee. Thank you. That committee was co-chaired by Tracy Fitz from IPAC and Leah Pezzarosi, who was the Executive Director of Open Door Youth Shelter down in Clark County. Early on in their work, they decided that they wanted to focus on chronic absenteeism and truancy. They did take a look at all status offenses as defined by Indiana Code, but they really wanted to focus on chronic absenteeism and truancy. And I see our co-chair here, and I was going to present because I didn't think you were here. But I'll keep going. We finalized the report early in 2026. And you have a copy, a hard copy of that report. I'm confident we can send also electronic copies of that report. For today's purposes, I'd love to direct your attention to this one pager. It's just a summary of the report, so you don't have to flip through all of that today. The subcommittee really they focused on chronic absenteeism and truancy, as I said, and they had some key findings. And you'll see across the top, their research indicated the common causes of truancy were transportation issues, personal family issues. Some were involved with the Department of Child Services, medical or psychological needs, frequent moving between school districts, and also conflict or bullying at school, which gets to the place of young people saying they didn't feel safe, and that's why they weren't going to school. Some of the findings that they discovered were that although truancy accounts for a large number of referrals to the youth justice system, they also had good data to show that they were not actually getting filed as cases. So there's referrals that come to youth justice system, and there's lots of options for diversion or informal adjustment or even deflection before it gets to a petition being filed. And what they found was there weren't a lot of those cases being filed in the juvenile courts. You can see on the one pager some of the chronic absenteeism rates from 20 to 23. We didn't put in more recent data again because this work was under the previous strategic plan. So I want to focus on that time period. I would like to draw your attention to the recommendations. The first one is actually not related to chronic absenteeism or truancy, but it is a recommendation to repeal the fireworks status offense. And that we'll talk about more later because I missed the deadline to get the recommendation form into the chair. We'll talk about that more later, but it was the key piece there is that we had a subcommittee that was co-chaired by someone from the prosecutors stakeholder group, and she said this really isn't necessary. We don't file a lot of these cases, so maybe we could just get rid of that, but we'll talk about that more later. The other thing is to adopt system-wide truancy best practices with a focus on early intervention. And that again gets to the place of prevention, deflection, diversion. The sooner that we can identify these young people, the better. That doesn't necessarily mean intervention with the juvenile justice system. So if you look up at that, again, look at the one pager, and if you look at the common causes of truancy, there's very little that the justice system can address. It really should be focused on those causes and how we as systems can address those causes for young people. Invest in proven programs and services. Again, where can we find, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are a lot of really good programs and services that work to address truancy. We have some down at the bottom of this one pager. That subcommittee heard a presentation from a program in Porter County called Project Attend. They also address truancy through their teen court. Again, not necessarily get involved in the formal end of the youth justice system. There's a robocall program. There are programs that young people, on their phones all the time, right? They can get robocalls to get them up in the morning to get them to school. The other piece was the youth service bureaus that their primary area of focus is on prevention of juvenile delinquency, so they can be a really good resource for communities. Lastly, the other primary recommendation is to fund attendance infrastructure and staffing. The subcommittee found that there are some shortages in for schools to be able to have the data collection infrastructure to actually, the laws changed, right? So there's certain requirements from the schools now, and some of the schools don't have the ability to actually report and collect and report that data that they're required to. The other thing was on staffing. So if we're going to intervene earlier, then schools need to have some staffing supports to be able to do some of those early intervention programs. So that is the summary, the high-level summary. Again, you have the full report in front of you. I really appreciate our task force and the subcommittee really appreciate your attention to this. Again, they finished this work a little after the strategic plan, but it was really good work by both the co-chairs and their entire committee. And I want to make sure that we got this in front of you so that you could review their work. And if there's any action that you all feel that you want to take in your own agencies, that would be fantastic. Or let us know if there's anything that you would like the task force to take on in terms of implementation. Any questions?
Any questions for Nancy? Nancy, you're also part of the JDI program, right? So did these two correlate together well or no?
They do. The Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative Network has an opportunity. One of the best perks about being a JDI county is you can network with other counties. So Porter County is one of our JDI counties, and their program has expanded to other counties. And there's also funding that's available to counties that are participating in that initiative. And some of them use their funding specifically for truancy programs.
How many counties in the state now are part of JDI?
36 active counties. And we have a couple in the hopper and a couple that are that have just taken a step back because of leadership changes, but coming back in at some point. 36 active counties serving 74% of Indiana's youth population, aged 10 to 17. So although we're not quite even to half of the counties, we've got a lot of the kids residing in those counties.
Thank you. Judge Kenworthy.
Youth Justice Oversight Committee still has grant funding available as well, so this would be a perfect fit for diversion funding. And the next cycle that the grant formula will reset. So those counties who previously received dollars under the diversion category, they can ask their maximum again. So they can get new funding, essentially. Yes.
Director.
Apologize, I don't have. I've been on the local offices, and one of the things that I've run into is that based on a previous passed law that DCS needs to be called at a certain number of days. And so that schools are kind of holding on to them and calling 30 or so at once. So then DCS staff is overwhelmed trying to get in. And I wonder if there's an opportunity for the task force to look at that and think about some of these better suited diversion opportunities rather than the department, which is just sort of a middleman, I think, between these.
That makes perfect sense to me. I also think that that goes to that funding and infrastructure for the schools. I think I'm wondering why. Is it because they just don't have capacity and so they kind of hang on to it until they can make all those, they get to the compliance with the statute, and then that's when they do it versus some early intervention. But happy to look into that if y'all think that we should. I don't know that Tracy wants to reconvene that subcommittee, but we could certainly talk to her about it, or at least think about ways the task force itself could look into that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Chris. Thanks, Nancy. As we look at best practices on truancy moving forward, I would recommend checking in with the Madison County Prosecutor's Office. They've got a really innovative truancy program that's received national attention. First thing they want to do is help families and help students who are missing school. The last thing they need to do is bring it to the court system. And so they've been proactive. They've dedicated an investigator to be out working with families, coordinating with schools. It could be a capacity issue. I don't know about scaling that, but there's early signs of good success with that program. It's something we're checking out.
Thank you, Mr. Naylor. Yes, they are a JDI county, and they have gotten some funding both through the YJOC grants, and I think they're using some of their JDI funding too, because they also have a probation officer that's specifically assigned to those cases, I believe. But again, they're not on probation. They are pulled back from that, but be able to do some more of that preventative or diversionary work. Thank you.
Nancy, do you know if the DOE's had any involvement or copy of that?
Yes, Steve Falco, who is the state attendance officer, serves on the task force. I don't know if he was a member of the subcommittee. No. Kathy Daniela? Yes. And Steve is a member of the action task force, so he approved, everything is kind of vetted up through the task force, and he was part of the group that approved the report for presentation to y'all.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Seeing no more questions. Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you.
Next, we have an update on our suicide prevention, bullying, and online safety task force. So we have a presentation from Caitlin Short.
Hello and good morning. Thank you so much for the opportunity to cover what the task force has been doing. I'm Caitlin Short. I serve as the State Suicide Prevention Director with Division of Mental Health and Addiction and co-chair the Suicide Prevention, Bullying, and Online Safety Task Force alongside Lawson from Carmel Clay Schools Corporation. So just a brief update on what our group has been doing. We have a subcommittee for each suicide prevention, bullying, and online safety with a couple of different focus areas that we've been looking at, and very much appreciate any guidance or suggestions, things to consider as we continue into the work. So beginning with our online safety subcommittee, and our larger group is talking about different educational curriculums that exist for digital safety and online wellness, and what it looks like to be able to recommend best practices and evaluation criteria for schools or other agencies when they're selecting that programming, and also wanting to make sure that what's recommended not only follows national best practices, but also lands with the youth and is not just in one year and out the other. And so they've been generating some questions for youth feedback. And those will be sent around different youth advisory boards in the list that we have for the state. And we've also shared them with the Educational Outcomes Task Force to take a look at to make sure that we're on track and relevant for that. For our bullying subcommittee, that committee has recently restarted after some changes in co-chairs, and they are meeting tomorrow. And we've asked them to take a look into effective interventions and what options schools have when they're responding. Our larger task force group has had several discussions about the ombudsman approach that was brought up in previous legislation and may make a return. And so evaluating if having a state to local or local to state is helpful in other areas, and trying to understand more about what data should be collected. Our group understands and has heard from different stakeholders that there's a maybe underreporting of bullying data when we look at it. And then some different voices about, well, our local schools say that the legal definition, different cases of a spat between students may not meet that in order to report. And there's a different interpretation and understanding of what constitutes bullying between the law, our parents, and our students and other caregivers. So they are investigating that further. We are also continuing to work on connecting with Department of Education and Department of Homeland Security and trying to understand with Department of Homeland Security taking over the bullying provisions, what that looks like and how best to include their voice in our group. And then our suicide prevention subcommittee is working on a couple of projects. One priority for them is, since the continuing education requirement for teachers to have renewed suicide prevention training every 3 years had been repealed. In a previous session, there's still a policy that remains that schools have to have a training that includes suicide prevention training on warning signs, but it's a bit broad and doesn't specify how often, who, or any criteria. And then a study came out from the IU Earthsay Institute called Connect to Care in Schools, and it's publicly available, and it found for suicide prevention 60% of teachers, and it's a representative sample of over 700 in different districts in Indiana. Nearly 60% of educators said that they not had a high quality suicide prevention training in the last 3 years, with high quality defined as more than 1 hour, and including role play of talking with a student at risk for suicide. That study also found nearly a third of school staff had experienced a loss to suicide within the school community. So it is a pressing issue, and they have also agreed in nearly 90% that it is part of their role, and they believe they want to be involved in preventing suicide and that their school has protocols in place. And then we also noted from that study that just over 1/3, 5% of school staff were still endorsing common myths about suicide, such as that it's about attention seeking and not preventable. So those are areas that we believe further the need for ongoing suicide prevention training that is high quality with our school staff as a point of intervention. And so the subcommittee is trying to look into how schools are interpreting the existing law and what they're doing at the local level. A survey was done at the end of the school year and heard from 12 districts. So we're trying to push that back out this September and hope to hear more about what's going on and compile better data. The other thing that they are working on is conducting listening sessions to hear from caregivers and youth serving professionals about what needs are, particularly around supporting 5th to 8th graders, and what types of resources are missing, what gaps and challenges they have to accessing services in order to create some additional resources. So their second listening session is later in September, and they're looking at doing a third. And that is what our task force has going on. Any questions or comments?
Any questions from members? So I know, what has it been, 2 years now we've had this task force?
Just about, yeah.
Okay. And any recommendations that you think we can do legislatively, or any thoughts that you might have where we're hitting some roadblocks here? How can we break through those roadblocks? Any thoughts on that?
I think that we're still trying to come to a concrete recommendation on the things that we want to recommend, but are close with having some standard criteria that we'd like for online safety for schools to consider. Getting some form of quality suicide prevention training or tightening up the existing code to make it more specific would also be beneficial, and is something that's why we're trying to get the data.
And then you mentioned the Department of Education, so most of this tends to happen in school setting type things, or at least in groups. Are you getting their involvement at all with the task force at all, the DOE?
We do have representation from Stephen Balco on that.
Okay. And you mentioned reporting, because I know reporting, it's legislative, they have to report, but they don't because there's no teeth to it, right? There's no punishments if they don't report. And I know it's something that school choice is one of those things that help a lot of kids, right? So at the same time, the competition of schools aren't reporting because of the competition that we put them under. And so if they're reporting, then you're sending your kid, you're looking to come into a community and you see this school that has all this reporting to bullying. It's like, I'm not going to go there. So schools don't report. So I guess I'm looking for smarter people in the room than me to say, what's our fix? How can we, what's the alternative? You know, any thoughts? I guess I'm looking, 41 kids died last year from suicide in Indiana.
So in the state of Colorado, there is statutory requirements that children in schools receive 6 free therapy or intervention sessions, right? So the legislature in Colorado funds that for all kids, you know, up to 18. I think it's to 21 if you have a disability, but then they are entitled to interventions, right? Regardless of insurance or whatnot. And then I'm going to look to Eden. I sent you an email. You don't have it. I didn't know if we could talk a little bit about this is the Rural Health Transformation Funds, right? That exist, and there's some RFFs out there right now, right? I don't know if things have been finalized, I guess, with some interventions, but we are definitely looking at the opportunity to use providers such as there's one that's called Cartwheel, and it's telehealth and it's evidence-based, and it's in 16 different states right now, but it targets school absenteeism. And their data, right, shows that they have 62% fewer absences per student when they're using this intervention. So we are looking at that to try to figure out if we can implement it across the state. And
do we have enough therapists?
Well, this is virtual, right? So that helps.
It also supports parents too,
yes,
in helping their kids too. So there's an intervention.
And then parents are also taught how to help support their kids to get to school, get up in the morning, get moving. So it's beyond just like capacity building, which I also appreciate about that, about the intervention. And Sarah, thanks for bringing up rural health transformation. Through the regional grants, we saw a lot of enthusiasm in communities for school-based youth mental health intervention across the state, and some really promising things, specifically in the southwest part of Indiana, that I can't wait to learn more how it goes, and if as they go well, how do we do more of that in other regions across Indiana? So it's a good opportunity for us to see what will work.
Are these ladies in your task force?
They're not, but I do work with Sarah in the agency, and I'm connected to the Department of Health.
Okay. Bernice?
I do have a quick question, and I might have missed it in your report. You shared that there is a policy that educators be trained on identifying children at risk for suicide. You said the policy is pretty broad, though. What I didn't hear is there any sort of plan, since there is a policy that you know of from DOE or anybody, to, even if we have to bring in a vendor, to provide it, is there some plan to use that policy to actually implement training for teachers? If you said it, I apologize.
No, that's a great question. Thank you. So in different efforts across state agencies, suicide prevention training has been provided for free. It sometimes has relied on different grant funding. Specifically within Division of Mental Health and Addiction, we were able to train over 500 QPR instructors, which has been found to be a good fit for schools since it's a shorter and basic training for introductory elements. So we're looking at opportunities to continue that. The Project Aware grant also that Division of Mental Health and Addiction has supported school-based efforts and training educators and students.
Yes.
Those school-based efforts, is it the school that initiates seeking it, or is there any, again, I'm thinking of more of a mandatory sounds so, but some sort of coordinated so everyone is getting it and no one is missed. So I'm just wanting to understand, does the training happen because schools seek it, or is it happening because central administration is saying, hey, here's an opportunity and we expect that schools do?
It varies a lot by school district and school buildings, what their leadership is encouraging and pushing for and how many folks. With different training for trainer opportunities, we've tried specifically to engage the school social workers and school counselors to train staff on professional development days to make it as widespread as possible and more sustainable within their buildings. The state has done some proactive outreach to offer those opportunities as well. And then some schools on their own have different things that they create, and we're available to support them and looking those over for best practices.
And can I ask or encourage you to reach out to teacher licensing when they're going to school? We put a lot on our teachers, right? We ask them they have to do a lot of continuing education and extra training and stuff. And so, when we got into trauma training, right? So it's hard to go back to the teachers and say, hey, we need you to learn more about trauma. But we got with the higher education world, right? The Ball States and those colleges that are teaching the classes that they had to have a semester of trauma training. And I didn't know if this is something that could be included within that trauma training to where we're not have to go back, that you're catching all the, since it's getting worse and worse. The bullying and suicide seems to be, if we can get everybody educated that's getting their license, that might at least stop the bleeding, so to speak. So, Director.
I was thinking a bit along the same lines. I think there are states or other systems that will choose an evidence-based philosophy that the state of Indiana could potentially look at. I know for hospitals, it's the Zero Suicide Initiative. Is there something like that that could be widespread, that we all say this, we're all working in the same way and we're all going to measure the same things? I know New Jersey has, I think, nurturing parents, so everybody picks the same evidence-based. So there might be something foundational that we could choose that way.
Yes.
Thank you. I love that. And I'll maybe one step further is identifying communities in which that really could take root. Kaylin, I don't know if you've been working with the fatality review staff on their review of Essence data, the syndromic surveillance data that supports or understands when kids show up in an emergency room with suicide ideation or anxiety. And we get those notifications. So we know where those communities, these kids are popping up. So if we can prevent, right, because we know when kids are having these feelings and they're showing these systems, let's connect that system in the community. So it's either school or a community-based organization or a CCBHC or whomever, and let's rally that community around this foundational pathway. I think there's some opportunity there for us to identify and be a little bit more evidence-informed, data-informed, and then identify which interventions would really take root in that community.
One thing that's proved to be very successful and has a good foundation is the multi-tiers of support for suicide prevention specifically, which is a model that was developed by the Education Development Center. North Central Health Services in the Lafayette and several surrounding counties in that part of the state. Over 17 school districts have implemented that. Where it involves engaging community partners, having a specific student wellness team, and a tiered approach between what's universal and upstream for everybody, down to targeted mental health interventions and referral pathways to those community mental health providers. That is ingrained in their policies, their protocols, and training staff.
You might think I work for DMHA as much as I talk about this, but I also think there's some real connection to our state's 988 system that we're missing here. So when kids have that tool themselves and they can text it and call it when they know about it, I think that it's really successful, and there's some evidence in other states that it works.
Mhm. Please check your student IDs as they get them. They're right. Statutorily, it's supposed to be on there. So of course I spot check at my house, but.
Yeah, and I would point out just from this discussion, and I know we always start the discussion on, especially with bullying with DOE and at DOE, it reminds me a lot of our work with chronic absenteeism, where we tried to reset that discussion and say they might be the data collector for a certain segment of it. However, are they the cause? Are they the driver and the creator of the bullying? Not how we look at the other systems and sectors that are involved in that. And we created kind of that shared reframing statement of chronic absenteeism being an issue that's shared across the community, across all the stakeholders, and across government. It seems like a small step, but that really unlocked a lot of the discussion we were having there. So I think a simple step that this could consider doing in the short term is really lining out how we're looking at the problem and putting out that statement.
Any other comments or questions? Seeing none. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have our legislative proposals from our director.
So I'll go up here to see if I can continue the trend of the clicker working for me when it doesn't work for others, because that's just for my own edification. But I do have some help on this one too. Emma Blackwell, our youth representative, who has agreed that she has no problem yielding the podium to me if she can do her part from her chair there, which definitely respect that. But wanted to go through a few things we talked about last time. Before we get into the formal proposal that we have for you today, I will note one thing that is not on it that we talked about last time was we discussed a potential budget increase for the SISC. That will not be in this legislation because the Supreme Court has agreed to roll it into their budget submission. So we appreciate them taking time to put that in there. It's a relatively small amount as far as that goes, so it just takes some of the distraction away from the legislative language that we're looking at passing. Of course, we'll still be there and in the room when that discussion is happening and making sure they understand what that ask allows us to restore and maintain and expand upon, largely looking at our family and youth engagement work, getting our student interns back in, getting our current engagement position from contract to a full-time staff position, and adding just some more stability to us as an organization as we've taken on new roles. So again, that's what won't be in this, but that is good news, and we definitely appreciate the Supreme Court being willing to roll that into their budget requests for the next biennium. So the biggest thing we have, oh, it's not working for me. Wait, right, I get to point now. And I'll let Emma take it from here. As we discussed last time, a revision to one of our key definitions that we have in the Indiana Code. So Emma?
I won't take up too much of your time, I promise. When it comes to the term vulnerable regarding youth, I feel that it really does not capture the image that we would like to display. While the intentions behind the term may have been pure, I'm sure no one wants to be called or categorized as vulnerable. It is a very disempowering term. These youth that you are all working hard to make change for are resilient, capable, and full of potential. The term vulnerable does not reflect that, and also does not align with our committee's work to around prevention and community access. We want to be as inclusive as possible in making sure that the support is accessible to all youth that is needed and without requiring them to be defined by a label.
Thank you. So this went through our Voices Committee, which is our newly formed group after we got our legislation passed a couple of sessions ago. This was the first task, is really looking through our code and saying, does this reflect how we're doing our work? And does it reflect you as folks that are working with the commission? So you can see really simple on this slide, the legislative change is saying, one thing that they looked at is saying, you know, we give this title of vulnerable youth and then we define specific criteria. Is there a reason we can't just list the criteria and not have to throw a label on top of that? So this part that's on the screen is specific to the youth members of the commission. And it just says we don't need that vulnerable youth definition. Let's just write down the criteria for what the youth members and their experiences are in order to qualify. So nothing is struck other than the term vulnerable youth. We're just moving that language into defining them under the membership section and no longer having that under a definition section. Yes. Yeah, and that's actually part 2 of it. One, we did go through the remainder of Indiana code as well as possible to look for if this definition existed outside of the Children's Commission. It does not. The word vulnerable is used flexibly, similar to at-risk and others by different agencies and organizations, but not defined. So actually this next page that I have up is a good list of where we have it listed for all of our acts and actions that we take as a commission. Now going into this section, it actually opened up a new question because a lot of this where it's talking about access to services for vulnerable youth, availability of services for vulnerable youth, that prior definition is talking about vulnerable youth as specific youth with system involvement. A lot of our talk, even though we've had so far today, is about prevention and about outside of systems and how we limit time in systems and work with youth and families and the community outside of those. So really, if we're looking at it through that lens, this is outdated to have in these definitions because all of these, we work far broader than just youth that are actively system involved. So you can see on this list, and we didn't want to go through and create new terms and new jargons and new definitions, but just by removing the term vulnerable and leaving it as youth, which is generally defined in most federal and state as the cutoff of around 25 years of age is where we say youth, but there's no bottom to that. So it's pretty inclusive of the groups that we talk about. So just removing the word vulnerable from that, and now we're open to all the discussions that we've actively been having, respectively. Any questions on that part? Yeah, that was a very good point. As we went through, we always want to make sure we're correcting the other places that could use a correction. And I think we have one more page on that. Go ahead.
This is your active online, definitely. Some of this language are very similar. It seems to speak to kind of the same.
Yeah, and that's another area. Yes, it's aside from our area, but talking about vulnerable individuals, and we see that language used in some of the disability support community. We've actually seen it with older adults, incapacitated adults, and otherwise. So if anything, I think by removing vulnerable from here, it takes away the confusion with those segments, because that's not what we're specifically talking about. And it could be if you laid them side by side saying, oh, you're talking, when you say vulnerable youth, you also mean this, this, and this. So it really just gives us a broader lens that we can go through without confusing with other elements where we've seen that kind of scattered throughout.
Thank you.
Yep. And then on this next page, there's one more vulnerable that's crossed out there. Again, talking about information sharing, as we talk about, we'll read presentations from IYI, and we'll have the YRBS presentation at the next meeting. We talk about youth at all states of being in and outside of systems. So again, our data looks are always very, very broad. So again, no reason to keep it in that place. Now above that, and where I have it highlighted in green, is some new language. And this actually came from some questions we had when we were diving into the online safety realm a little bit more. So we have a part of code that kind of sort of opens the door to online safety, but really in a more specific realm than it reads. So previously, to this recommended change, it really talks about the use of social networking, websites, cellular technology, wireless communication, digital media, as it relates to crimes against children. Certainly not something we want to remove or take out of there, but this is when this language was inserted at the onset of the CISC, and we didn't have nearly as much awareness of the amount of use that children would have of these different technologies, how it would impact them in different ways. So suggesting that we add a sentence to that we keep, of course, crimes against children, but we talk about, and these are words taken directly out of the work of our existing task forces and subcommittees, so we're not getting mission creepy, but saying child development, safety, mental health, and educational outcomes. So that lines up with the language of, again, work that we're currently exploring and getting into a little bit more. I'm always careful on word lists because I know we can all think of like 6 more words we could add to that, or ways that we can put something more broad there. So I'm definitely open to a discussion about if we think we have the right words, if we'd like something more generalized, like overall child health and well-being, etc.
Any questions?
And this will be something that still needs to get turned into legislation and author shopping for that and doing all that. So there will, of course, be room to do tweaking as we go forward. So one, I want to make sure that we have the right intent, that it makes sense to add something that allows us to work more broadly in that digital space. But then we want to make sure we get the words well where it's not limiting us either.
Senator Yoder, why don't you introduce yourself since you weren't here when we did introductions?
Shelley Yoder. I serve Senate District 40, and it's great to be here. Sorry for being late. I was
Used to that from senators, though.
Well, I'm not going to say anything about that, but I was curious. I have children in K through 12, and talking with my kids about the cell phone ban that's currently in play. And I was asking if there was any collecting of data, even if it's anecdotal, from students on the impact that this is having and how we could gather some of those stories for, you know, the good and the bad. I mean, I'm just so curious, and I'm sure the Department of Ed may be following it, but how do we ensure that our commission gets that information and hears back on its impact across Indiana?
Yeah. And putting this into our broader category of all of the items that we work on. So it goes under that broad study and evaluate title, where it would be as anything else as the commission requests or as our task forces and subcommittees are working on it. We're definitely bringing that data forward and up. And I know that data is already appearing in some of the work that IYI does. YRBS is reflecting some of that. So I think it, from our perspective, it's making sure we're maintaining that discussion. And with our online safety group, this now gives them more of the language to say we can take a really deep dive into some of those categories.
I know a couple of my grandkids wouldn't talk to me after we passed the no cell phones in schools. So,
Thank you. My kid already got a referral for getting his cell phone out, so it's working in Beech Grove. I love this idea and would love to kind of think through how we could do that, because I think even some focus groups or even some just small before and after studies would be really interesting on this. Mark, if it's okay, I've been kind of ruminating on these. I'm with you. Like, the lists kind of worry me in writing, and I'm wondering the value of thinking about this more generically. It's not the term I like to use, but maybe more broadly, is just childhood safety and mental health, or childhood safety and health. And we could probably pull a lot of things underneath that. I worry that this gets us either painted into a corner or creeped out into things that maybe we just don't feel like serve us after a while. So just thoughts for consideration.
Yeah, and other state language, I did ask around a little bit about what we're seeing elsewhere. DOE right now is using language similar to whole child well-being. So it's always good if we can look at a definition that's already out there and been vetted through that, as long as we feel like that's inclusive enough of what it is. And again, definitely when we talk about the digital space, there's going to be something new to add to the list that we weren't even thinking about, or that we'll say like, well, gee, did we cover the physical health ramifications of them being in and off of that? Is that really reflective here? Totally agree that we always need to be careful of those lists when we make them, especially in relation to technology. So I again put that back to the commission. Do we like something more general like whole child well-being versus having more of that list format?
I would echo your instinct. I like where agencies can be speaking and using the same language. I think that's beneficial. So I would favor, I didn't actually catch entirely the phrase you said, whole child wellness or something like that, as maybe something we can duplicate to show amplified effort.
Absolutely good with that. So again, we'll still need to actually create the legislation. We'll see which of our legislators want to be a part of authoring that and helping introduce that. So as we do that, as you know, there's always room for tweaking throughout the process. Things don't usually exit in the exact same form that they started, but I appreciate that we can have this discussion up front and make that a part of it.
You know any legislators?
I know a couple. Let's see, whichever ones aren't avoiding eye contact currently. No. Hopefully this is something that's a good common sense of cleaning up some language where it needs clean up. And again, some of this has been in place for a very, very long time. Actually, both the ones we're changing to vulnerable youth and expanding beyond just crimes against children are really from the initial forming of the Children's Commission when we were having a different discussion. So that's pertinent to look at that and say, this is just making sure that we're not boxing ourselves in. And speaking of that, the last thing I have on this list that's really not the least important is we do currently have an expiration in code of January 1, 2029. Some will say, well, gee, it's only 2026, but in legislative terms, we're about technically like a year and a half away from that creeping right up on us. So did ask for a bump up on that to knock it out. Right now, what I have down there is taking it out 8 years, just so it's reflected in the legislation that they would be looking at it as technically from date 10 years out, but open to what we would like to propose there as far as extending that expiration. Not be accepting any motions for disbanding the commission in 2029.
Do you think we can put that in? No.
Yeah, it's because it's all aligned in the same strip of code, so it should be fine there.
Have you had any discussions with Mike Mullins yet with LSA?
Not yet.
Might not hurt just to get the ball started a little bit. So if he sees something on there.
Yeah. Oh, I know there's been some changes as far as timelines for commissions and other entities, their activity level and so forth. So we want to make sure we're in compliance with that.
Any other comments, questions? Thanks. Next, Executive Director report.
All right, get to keep standing. All right, a few things, but definitely some things that are moving and that we're excited about. So that is good news all around. And I will have a couple of brief action items for you too. But one, I've been asked to say, what's the update on the safe baby courts that we've discussed and kind of probed around at the last couple of meetings. So happy to say that that project is moving along quite well. The commission was asked to jump in and be a part of coordinating and helping get that off the ground and moving that forward. And that's in partnership, of course, with DCS, the Indiana Office of Court Services, and the Villages of Indiana, who has some contracts involving the coordination and helping get that set up and established. So happy to say I think we've got great progress there where there hasn't been one established yet after the legislation that was passed a couple of years back. We now can say that we're on target to, by the midpoint of next year, have the first one established in the state of Indiana. Can't make promises on exact dates yet, and we're shoring up those relationships. But I think we're in a really good place as far as that's going. Exploring some larger funding opportunities. DCS has offered to assist in some areas of that. There's some other places we're going to look at as well. And some federal funding available through HRSA that we'll be applying for in the near future. There'll be probably the villages taking the lead, but it's all supporting that as well. That will allow for the proper staffing to do that well and do that appropriately. The biggest pivot has really been the realization that we need to move it away from the strict problem-solving court model and the certification models of that, where they are inherently, the focal point is usually more towards the parent that's in that case or the adult that's in that case, and moving it into more of a child welfare space where we can be looking at it from that angle. Not taking anything away from that model, it's more about avoiding model confusion, that this is distinct and different, just as those are distinct and different. And sometimes we need to do this sorting so we can really figure out what we're doing and how we're moving ahead on things. But we did go to a national conference just a couple of weeks ago in Boston with the 0 to 3 group. That's kind of the large technical support entity on that, along with members of the team. And I think we got a good batch of lessons learned from states who've been doing this for a very long time, that have learned a lot of things the hard way, so we don't have to relearn the hard lessons. And the main thing they said is definitely take your time. Don't try to just do a massive statewide launch all at once. Find a good partner, find the right community, build it appropriately, and then have your model based on it. So that's really what we're looking to do. More to come. We're hoping by December we'll have a bigger announcement as far as what those initial courts could look like, who will be involved with them, and some of the key partnerships getting off the ground there. So, but I'd like to give an update that I think we've been able to be a good part of that. We'll probably look at it into the future is if it becomes an ongoing issue that's relevant to the CISC, do we assign that to one of our task forces? Perhaps the Child Welfare Task Force, the Child Health and Safety Task Force, the ones that work directly in that welfare space. Would make some sense. We're not there yet. Right now, it's one of those initiatives that we're offering our support to. But we could definitely see as the model takes hold that there might be an ongoing place where it can be at least part of the discussion. Next up, I have our annual report. So you'll have a printed copy in front of you there, and that was sent electronically as well. This is not final. It's simply final. So anybody that's, I think of my kid that just graduated college and had to do his dissertation like 6 different ways, right? So it's like there's 6 different versions of final. Offer you to look through there. A couple of pieces that we're still looking at shaping up there. I know our dear director Rainey, we need to get a picture from him so he's not pictured person in there. Get that short up.
I had pictures taken last week.
Yeah, we figured. So nothing's going to get printed until we get those final little pieces in. It is due to submit by the start of next month. So we have a little time as you're flipping through. I don't think everybody needs to read through it in gross detail today. Other things I had on there is we don't have listed formally in this report yet, the Youth Justice Oversight Committee. We've spent the last year kind of folding them back into the CISC. So that is a consideration if we want that committee and its members listed in this report. For those that haven't had to do media printing and stuff, this is at a clean 16 pages now. They like the 4-page rule because it's how the paper folds and gets collated and everything. But we do have a nice big blank spot on the back here. So there is a space where we could try to make that happen. Any thoughts from the group about the Youth Justice Oversight Committee, at least the membership being included on this one? They do have a separate annual report that I'm also compiling to the side of their activities for the year as well. It's really more of a, if we want to show that linkage between the two directly on this one, or if we want to save that for next year when they're a little bit more hand in hand.
I don't have a strong preference there. I'd say if there's space in the setup this year, fine. If there's not, we'll roll it in next year.
All right. Sounds good. So we won't give our folks over at the communications office a panic and try to shoehorn something in if we're at a good spot. But otherwise, I invite you to look through the report. We have a lot in there about our youth, family, and caregiver engagement work this time through, because that's, again, where we've really taken on that charge. So we want to showcase that. Plus, for people that have to read a lot of annual reports, it's a slightly more enjoyable read when we can actually give stories of what we're doing and how we're doing it, and not just piles of lists of who's on what task force and all those different things. So good material in there, a lot of participation from the entire CISC team, from our youth representatives and others we've worked with in that space. So always very happy to be able to showcase when we have that good work going forward.
I have a question. Should, for example, the members, right? Audrey's on there listed as the chief of staff for the vertical, which she was when but now I assume there's somebody else that is taking that. Should this be updated, people? Because I think some of our names on our memberships on the subcommittees are also outdated.
Yeah, and it's always a tough thing with the annual reports too, because we're looking at the year back,
Yeah.
going back to June of last year. So typically what we'll look at there is who was serving for the MURA at that time. So in the governor's office, we're looking at who our new person is going to be still. So the most recent appointee would be that individual. I think we are still looking at saying, well, do we want to change titles because they have a different title now, they're in a different place. And that it does get a little bit trickier, or do we just put service dates on there? So it's more clear about that, because some people do use this as their evergreen reference to say, well, who's the person? Well,
Right.
that's the person. Yeah, so I think that some of that's the little tweaks that we're going to do at the last minute, but genuinely a good question to make sure we're not causing confusion when we're looking at these kind of predated materials when we put them out there. All right.
Any other comments?
I just have one more item that's pertinent because in a couple of hours we'll be rolling into the next thing. We've had some discussion with the Child Welfare Task Force. Now, we've had some reporting on their activities and such here. We've discussed them as kind of a group that was created through legislation, but then wasn't legislatively staffed and taken up formally as a legislative committee. So the CISC said we will offer some staff support and other things to get that off the ground and get that Child Welfare Task Force functioning and moving well, which it has. They've had, I think, a year of meetings now, almost a year of meetings now. And we've been piggybacking where they come in at 1 o'clock after our commission days, and they have their meeting as well. So we had some discussions with leadership of where that's going, where the discussions are going. Is it going to be a committee that just has a one-time report and then it's off on its own and decides to come back around? And there's been a real desire to say there's some ongoing conversations happening there that are really just starting and really need a long-term home to belong to. So what we've had is looking and saying, do we want to formalize them as a task force of the Commission on Improving the Status of Children versus being a task force that is kind of in its own space, but supported by the Commission. So this discussion's been brought up. It's been brought up with leadership and Representative Devon, the current chair of that. And I think it's landed on saying it's probably time to consider, do we formalize that under the Children's Commission? I can say in our opinion and the staff opinion, we don't really love mixed relationship. It's always hard to say who should be doing what and what's our level of support and all of that. So really firming it up helps us know where we need to be and what we need to do and how we can support. So that is always a good thing. But I don't know if Representative Devon, if you wanted to have any points on that or thoughts.
I know with our new director, DCS, it's and I loved our previous ones, but you're a breath of fresh air to the providers, where there's always been this wall that's been there before, and you've broken the wall down. And so this task force, I think, has helped the providers realize that she's human. She cares as much as they do about kids, and that they become a team on the same side of the football field, not opposites. And so I think we're kind of truly finding some good places. I would love for the task force to have some, if nothing else, it's created open communication that we haven't had before, without feeling like somebody was going to get blackballed from something. And so, but to help the commission, be more effective with this task force. But I guess I want to bring up one other thing too, because the director, I'll put her on the spot a little bit, because you had 5 or 6 other topics that you would love to discuss through study. And I can put Madeline on the hot seat too, because it was, I don't know how much involvement Madeline had. Madeline O'Rourke is our liaison with DCS. Would you raise your hand? So, and they're very critical. If you want me to read them, I'll be happy to. Just because. So she was looking at trying to include an interim study discussion on modernizing modernizing the child welfare technology. And I know that's something that we've had discussions with DCS for the last couple of years, and it's very archaic. And I think that should be, and it's their number one priority. And I agree that it should be number one. But again, it's costly as well. Number two would be strengthening prevention and impact of family resource centers. And so I think we have 11 or 12 now in the state, family resource centers. Somewhere in there, that's okay. We had a pilot program a few years back, and it's so successful that they're starting to expand. But I think every community should have one as well. But some of the larger, population areas maybe need more than that. Maybe a central site, but maybe some branches of some sort that might feed off of that. The third one would be accomplishing a home for every child ratio. And I don't know if that's more looking data or if it's truly trying to find a home for each child.
Like the idea of the strategy in the task force to get to the goal, because I think it's there's a lot of moving parts and it helps more of a community conversation.
And then fourth, supporting Indiana's child welfare workforce. So are those our providers, or is that more DCS type family case managers or support staff within them?
I think that's staff, but when I consider child welfare, it would be more role when we think about, because even these conversations I'm hearing where we are with therapists, how do we, make sure our kids have what.
And are we working with our colleges, as far as the education system or high schools to say there's a need? Okay. Then number 5, improving the cross-system collaboration of human trafficking response. And I know that's getting to be quite serious.
Again, I think that would just be nice to have a larger educated.
And then last would be DCS partnerships with community-based behavioral health services and outpatient organizations. So 6 highly needed discussions. So I don't know how we would go about, do we tie it into the task force? Do we create its own? I don't know.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts, Director?
I think a lot of those would make sense under the task force as maybe where we build out some of the subcommittees. So as the structure of that evolves and we're looking at more specific topics, that seems to fit right in. So, which is always good, because this task force, if we decide to take it on as a task force of the commission, it is occurring outside of our typical strategic plan, which is where we create those goal areas. So I'm in favor of, if they have some agreed upon goals that they can jump right into, that sounds like that would save us that step of figuring out our identity for the next year and waiting for the next strategic plan.
I'm definitely in agreement with you about this topic, broadening membership just a bit. I think that's their specific area, but I think it's
Yeah, and under the CISC, our membership would become untethered from, we've been basing it on that legislation that wasn't taken up on, but if it becomes a CISC task force and how we populate our subcommittees and all of that, it becomes a lot more available to invite others in.
Over the years, I think several of us in this room have served on the various iterations of the Child Welfare Task Force, or, various names for it. And what I've observed over the years is that those groups exist for a few years, gain some momentum, and then ends, and all that momentum is lost. And so I see, number one, a lot of benefit to having a long-standing committee. This is an issue that's never going away. It's an issue that always needs diligence and attention. And so I think this is a natural home for it. And I think it is entirely consistent with the aim of the Children's Commission, which is, the one-stop shop umbrella to discuss policies regarding children in the state of Indiana. So I 100% agree. It's great.
And where I liked it better than just having a summer study, legislative summer study, is that it's usually you're allowed 1 or 2 meetings and you're done. This would allow an expansion of that as far as further discussion, or, let's research this a little deeper and come back type of thing.
This is not a fully framed thought, so I apologize, but I have, as I listen quite a bit and recently attended a JDAI meeting that was really well done. I think, why don't we do the same thing in child welfare? And I think this could be a great opportunity to have an initiative built around child safety and well-being. So I think that would be a great way to get to it.
Do we need a motion or anything or no?
Typically for this kind of thing, since it's existing outside the strategic plan and we're creating a new task force, I would prefer that we have a motion on the table. Yeah.
Do I hear a motion? In a second? Any discussion? All in favor? Say aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Well, we'll have good news for that task force later today. So appreciate that. Appreciate the thought and discussion on it. And I know it's been something that we took on knowing that there was a possibility we lean in this direction, and absolutely right. It's not work that ends. So having it on a time limited group doesn't really do it justice. So
You can take a look at our current list of members of the task force, that if we need to expand it, I don't see why we couldn't.
yeah, we can. And actually
Or
now
we break it out into subcommittees that could be more directive towards that one particular topic. And
yeah. And as a task force of the CISC too, we'll have the ability to actually post more materials and get that online off of our website and use those resources. So just solidify it a little bit more. I would note that one also, because it has multiple members that come from this body, it would fit under the open door law. So we would be doing live streaming, captioning, recording and posting those recordings afterwards. So, which I think for the seriousness of the topic, public access to those discussions, by all means, right? So just, we'd have that component, but we'd be broadcasting that and putting that through our existing channels that we have through the Children's Commission.
This is a question that's different than the discussion. I didn't know if we're open. I just want to make sure that I understand the process, because I don't want me to assume somebody else is doing it. With your legislative policy proposals, how do those get introduced? Does that happen? Can it happen administratively? Do people talk? I don't want to get to the other side of this and say, well, no one actually, I thought somebody else was handling it. What's the process here?
Yeah.
So I don't miss something.
Mark comes behind us with a knife and says, "You're going to do this." So, and it's usually like,
And he's kind of scary.
Really scary. So no, it'll be like, I'll take back our feedback from today, put that into a format that then usually, yes, we start with our own legislators and saying, would you like to carry it? Would you like to have your name on it? Or do you want to introduce it to a legislator who would be an appropriate carry for that? Since for a lot of the things we endorse, we have some of the chairs and leadership of those exec committees here in the room, it makes sense if it comes from them. But I'll get that language shored up, then I'll reach out to all of our legislators and their LAs and saying, let's have that discussion about who would like to play lead on this, what chamber it starts in, all those different things. And which reminds me, we do have on the agenda, we have some bonus action items for approval of the annual report and approval of that plan for introducing the legislation, knowing that both can have edits to the process, but I don't know if we want to have just a quick affirmation on both of those.
well, I guess on the legislation, if it gets modified, I don't know if you need a motion to continue with having it proposed, but we'll need to see the final draft of it before we,
Yeah.
so I don't know if
So
we need to really do that.
I think October, we can bring that back. No, by October, that should be in full form.
But we can we'll get with Mike Mullins, LSA attorney that usually drafts legislation with the children's. So, and he was at your last meeting. What meeting was that? It was here in the building.
No.
I can't remember what was that meeting.
I know he's on board with the discussion. So
yeah.
So yeah, we can hold that one and come back when we have the final product for that. And then with the annual report, that's just, are we good to submit that on September 1st, pending any, it looks like we're just looking at some editorial changes that we might throw in there.
You also have the room for that.
You do. I've just been instructed, just don't do anything that gives the communications office a panic attack. So that's our limiter there. Fair enough. I do have one item that got added onto my report list as I was walking in, which is that we do have a juvenile probation appointee. I haven't actually even gotten to announce it to them yet because it literally came as we came in, but we do have an appointee. So I'll be talking to them before the next meeting, getting them onboarding and having them ready to go. But I won't announce their name since I haven't actually gotten to tell them yet. Got to go in the right order on that, but there'll be one more seat filled at the table, so we're happy to have that. There's been a gap since we had our good friend Corey George moving on to other things last year. We've been looking to make sure we have the right person to fill that in. That's a great voice from the field, voice that we always like to have. So exciting news there. Otherwise, I think that's all on my report.
Thank you, Mark. Any comments from committee members?
No, well, yes. With having a probation officer on the committee, it makes me think about frontline from Jennifer's team and like, should there also be a case manager voice at the table?
Yeah, so we're talking about the CISC itself, which that's all in code and laid out on that. So, but now looking at some of the other groups for the Child Welfare Task Force, for example, I think those are places where we could certainly consider having that frontline voice there. We'd have to be looking at a larger change to code to say bringing somebody in onto the CISC body itself, which is formed with the idea of agency leadership that can endorse and make the decision when it gets to this point. But again, we've got lots of other places where really most of the work does happen. And most of the vetting and data support and talking about those direct experiences happen where we can be plugging more in. I know we'd always love to have some more people that are directly seeing and witnessing what's happening on the ground. We have good intentions and good ideas up here, but we need the people that are part of implementing them to be a part of the discussions for sure.
Any other comments?
I can take a motion.
Do you motion? Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
All right.
All right. I believe we are adjourned. Thank you all.